So I've been doing freelance design for almost a year now, and I figured it was a great time to share my updated process on how I start any design project from scratch. Because starting a project is its own skill. It's not just about being good at design, it's also about knowing how to get the right information from your client, how to find inspiration efficiently, and how to structure everything so the project actually moves forward smoothly without a ton of back and forth confusion. So today I wanted to talk about how I onboard any new client and start any new design project. Whether it's product design such as a web or mobile app, or a landing page, or even branding and identity, this one is for all of the designers or even vibe coders and developers who are trying to design your own product and want to know where to start. And I do want to mention up front that these are all pretty different projects. The psychology behind each one is different, the goals are very different, and understanding these differences is very important because it changes how you approach the work from the very beginning. For product design, like mobile or web apps, you are thinking about how the user would actually use the product. You're focused on usability, intuitive flows, and making sure that someone can accomplish their goal within the product without friction or confusion. The psychology here is all about reducing cognitive load and making interactions feel natural. For landing pages and websites, you are usually trying to drive user downloads, educate people about the product or organization, or build trust through things like feature highlights and reviews. It's all about the user, but through a marketing and education lens. You're trying to convince someone to take a specific action, whether that's signing up, downloading, purchasing, or just learning more. The psychology is more about persuasion and removing hesitation. For branding, you're thinking about identity, recognition, personality, and how everything ties together visually. You want someone to see a color or a logo or a piece of content and immediately know that it's from this brand. The psychology here is about creating emotional connections and building familiarity over time. So even though my process has similar elements across all three, the way that I think about each project is different from the start. So let's get into my actual process. Every project starts with an intro call. I think of this as the design discovery phase, and it is one of the most important conversations that you'll have throughout the entire project. The goal here is to get as much context as possible from the client. I need to understand what the product is from a fundamental level. What problem does it solve? Who is it for? What makes it different from alternatives? And I want to hear about the ideas and features that they have in mind. I also want to know if they already have something in mind in terms of the vibe and the design direction. Things like, have they seen other apps or websites that they love? Are there any brands that they admire? Do they have any existing brand assets or previous design work that we need to consider? But it's totally okay if the client doesn't have any direction, and most of my clients actually don't. They might have a general sense of what they like something more modern or something more minimal, or something more fun and playful, but sometimes they can't articulate what that means visually, and that's totally okay. My rule of thumb for design is this. Many clients know what they want and know what they like, but they don't actually know until they actually see it. I think this is so important to understand as a designer. You can't expect a client to give you a perfect brief with everything already figured out. That is actually not how the creative process works. Your job is to show them options, help them react to real visuals, and guide them toward the right direction that feels right for their product and their audience. I also use the intro call to understand practical things like timeline, budget constraints, and who the decision makers are. Is it just one person approving everything, or is there a team involved? Understanding the approval process early helps avoid surprises later on. After the intro call, I have enough context to start the next phase, which is gathering inspiration. But I also make sure to follow up with a written summary so that both sides are fully aligned on what the project involves. Alright, so after the intro call, I do a deep dive on all of my UI inspiration sources. This is one of my favorite parts of any design project because I really get to explore what's out there. I want to be clear that this phase is completely separate from the UX research, which comes later and is a completely different process. Right now, I'm purely focused on the visual direction. Of course, if you've seen any of my other videos, I like to start with Mobbin. Also, Mobbin is sponsoring this video, so a huge shout out to them. I'm super lucky to be sponsored by a product that I actually use every single day in my design process, and I have a 20% off link in the description if you're interested. So Mobbin is essentially a huge library of actual apps and designs and screenshots from real products that are live in the App Store. You can search by app name if you want to see how a specific company designed something. You can search by screen type, so if you need to design a profile screen or a checkout flow or an onboarding sequence, you can see dozens of examples. You can also filter by industry, which is incredibly helpful when you're working in a specific space, and you can search by UI pattern to find things like bottom navigation bars, card layouts, or modal designs. What I love most is that everything in there is from real shipped products. You're not looking at conceptual work or design projects. You're seeing what actual companies with actual users are putting in front of real people. I feel like that's so valuable because it shows you what's actually working. These designs have been tested, refined, and approved by real teams that have a lot at stake. Back in the day, I would have to actually manually find competitor apps, download, sign up, and take manual screenshots, which was weeks of work and lots of storage space. Mobbin is constantly being updated with new apps and new screenshots and new animations, so you're always seeing current design trends rather than things from 10 years years ago that might feel dated now. The design industry moves very quickly, and it's really helpful to have access to fresh resources. I also use it to explore different industries and see how apps in specific spaces tend to look. If I'm working on a fitness app, I can see what other fitness apps are doing and understand the visual conventions users in that space expect. If I'm working on a productivity tool, I can see the patterns there, and if I'm working on something in fintech, I can study how banking and investment apps handle complexity and build trust. It helps me understand the design language of whatever space I'm entering. Other than Mobbin, I use Twitter a lot. There are so many designers sharing work and inspiration there. I follow a bunch of design accounts and my feed is constantly giving me new ideas. People share screenshots of apps they like, design details they noticed, and breakdowns of why certain things work well, and it's a great way to stay current with what the design community is excited about. Dribbble is another go-to resource for me, and Dribbble tends to be more polished and sometimes more experimental than what you would see in production apps. Designers often use Dribbble to showcase their best work and push creative boundaries, and that can be great for sparking your imagination, seeing what's possible visually, even if some of it is not practical for real products. Behance is also similar in that way. There's a lot of case studies and project breakdowns that can give you insight into how other designers approach similar problems, and I especially like Behance for seeing full project presentations where designers explain their process and reasoning, not just the final result. I also like to check out sites like Spotted and Prod, which specifically showcases UI from real products that are live and being used. It's a lot similar to Mobbin in that way. The point is to cast a wide net and expose yourself to as many different approaches as possible, because you never know where the inspiration will come from. So when I'm gathering inspiration, I like to go on what I call a screenshot frenzy. I'm just saving everything that catches my eye without judging too much in the moment. If something looks interesting or makes me feel something, I save it. I can always filter later. And after I save things, I start dividing them into different vibes and categories. This organization happens naturally as I notice patterns on what I am drawn to. For example, I might have a section with clean, minimal designs with lots of white space and restrained typography, another section with colorful bold designs with saturated colors and playful elements, maybe another for dark mode interfaces with high contrast and dramatic lighting. This organization is really helpful because later when I present to the client, I can show them distinct directions and let them react to each one. Instead of showing them a random pile of screenshots, I can walk them through curated options. Something else I keep in mind during this phase is that different design industries have different design languages. There are visual patterns and trends that users in specific spaces have come to expect, and understanding these conventions is part of being a good designer. For example, AI products right now use a lot of soft gradients and moving elements, and there is often a sense of depth and dimensionality with glowing elements and smooth animations. This visual language communicates intelligence and sophistication. Crypto and Web3 products tend to be more futuristic, using neon colors, bold typography, dark mode backgrounds, and geometric shapes. The aesthetic feels innovative and like being on the cutting edge of technology. Banks and financial products lean heavily on blue because it communicates trust, stability, and reliability. You will also see a lot of white space, clean layouts, and conservative typography, and the design needs to feel safe and professional because people are trusting these products with their money. Education and health apps often use lots of bright colors to feel approachable, friendly, and non-intimidating because they want to reduce anxiety and make users feel more welcome, especially users who might be nervous about learning something new or dealing with health concerns. Sleep apps almost always use purple and deep blue tones because of their calming associations. The colors themselves are meant to make you feel relaxed and ready for rest. Understanding these conventions is really important because sometimes you want to lean into them so that your product feels familiar to users in that space. And sometimes you might want to intentionally break from conventions to stand out from competitors. Either way, you should know what the norms are so that you can make an intentional choice on whether to follow them or not to. So I want to pause here and talk about something important that I think a lot of newer designers get confused about. The lens you use when looking for inspiration for UI elements is completely different than the lens that you use for UX inspiration. These are related but very distinct disciplines, and mixing them up can make your research a lot less effective. When I'm doing UI research, I'm looking at purely visual things. I'm asking myself questions like, how do these colors work together? What emotions do they evoke? Is the palette warm or cool? Is the vibe energetic or calm? How are they using gradients? What about shadows? What's the spacing like between elements? Does it feel airy and open or dense and compact? What fonts and typography are they using? And how does a visual hierarchy guide your eye? All of these things play a role on the look and feel of your app. UI is about the aesthetics and the emotional response that someone has when they first see your design. I think that a well-designed UI makes someone feel something before they even interact with it. On the other hand, when I'm doing UX research, I'm looking at completely different things. I'm asking questions like, where do they put the search bar? Is it at the top where users expect? Are things persistent or do they appear on different screens? Where are the primary buttons placed and are they easy to reach on the phone? Are the tap targets big enough? Are elements sized appropriately for accessibility? Can someone with a vision impairment read this? Does the flow of the screens make sense? Can Can a user easily understand where they are in the app and where they can go next? How many steps does it take to complete a core task? And are there any unnecessary steps that could be eliminated? These are a few of the many questions that I ask while looking through a UX lens. UX is about usability, clarity, logic, and that the product actually works well for the people that are using it. It is all about reducing friction and making sure that people can reach their goals efficiently. I've heard that good UX is often invisible because when things work well, people don't notice. They just simply accomplish what they came to do. So when you're taking screenshots and gathering resources, you should be aware of which lens that you're looking through. Are you saving the screenshot because it looks beautiful? Then that's UI inspiration. Are you saving it because the layout is really smart and the flow is very intuitive? That is UX inspiration. So other than the direct UI inspiration from apps and websites, I actually also like to go on Pinterest to put together a general mood board for the app. This is less about specific screens and UI patterns, and more about the overall emotion that the app should be giving off. It is way more abstract and conceptual. I'm actually trying to capture a feeling rather than trying to collect specific design elements. Is a product supposed to feel cozy and warm, clean and professional, bright and energetic? These mood boards might include photography that might capture the right vibe, illustrations with the right personality that we're going for, color palettes from nature or art or fashion, or even textures like paper or fabric, or materials that evoke certain feelings. For example, if I'm working on a meditation app, my mood board might include photos of calm nature scenes, minimalist interiors, soft morning light, and none of these are UI references, but they all communicate the feeling the app should have. This might seem like an extra step, but it's really helpful for aligning with the client on the emotional direction before getting into specific design decisions. Like I said before, sometimes the client can't tell you exactly what UI style that they want, but they can point to a mood board and say, yes, this feels correct, or no, this feels too cold and corporate, or I want something more vibrant than this. Getting aligned on emotions first makes all the detailed decisions easier later because you simply have a shared reference point. Okay, so at this point, I have a ton of screenshots, references, and mood boards. And the next step is to organize everything in a way that it's easy for the client to understand. I put everything into Figma, divided into clear sections, and each section represents a different direction or vibe. Whatever categories emerged organically from my research. I organize it so the client can easily scan everything and understand what they're looking at and what they're looking for. I don't just dump hundreds of screenshots on them and ask what they think. That would be very overwhelming and would not give them a clear framework for making decisions. I usually add some notes or labels to help guide them, and then we have a meeting to go through all of it together. I walk them through each direction, explain what I was thinking, and then show them the examples. The client will usually pick 1 to 3 directions that resonate with them. Sometimes they want to just stick with one vibe and go all in on that vibe. Sometimes they want to combine elements from different sections. They might say something like, I love the color of this style, but I love the typography of this style, and I want the spacing to feel more like this one. That kind of feedback is super helpful because it gives me a clear direction on where I need to go. Either way, by the end of this meeting, we have a much more clear sense of where we are heading visually. This vague idea of modern or clean has been replaced with concrete references that we both understand and agree on. This step is so important because it gets the client involved in the creative process early. They feel ownership over the direction because they helped choose it, and you avoid that painful situation where you spend weeks designing something only to find out that it is not exactly what they had in mind. By aligning early, you save time and frustration for everyone. Okay, so after we aligned on a visual direction, it's time to get creative. This is where I start actually designing, and it's one of my favorite parts of the process. From here, I usually create a few different mockup screens with a lot of different UI options for the client to choose from. These are not fully designed screens with real content and real features. They're more like visual explorations, showing different ways that we can execute on the direction that we chose. The purpose of these mockups is to translate the inspiration in the mood board photos into something concrete and more specific to the product. We're taking the abstract direction and then making it real. Maybe one mockup uses rounded corners and softer shadows for a more friendlier feel. Another can use more angular shapes and higher contrast for a more bolder and modern look. Another one can play with a different color balance, maybe using more of a secondary color rather than the main neutral color. And another option might explore different options with hierarchy, typography, and how dense information is on the screen. I usually create about 3 to 5 different options so that the client doesn't get too overwhelmed but still has several options to choose from. Usually what happens is the client will pick and choose different elements from different screens that they like, where they might say they like the button style of this screen, the typography of another, maybe even a card from a different one. And then I just combine all of those UI elements into one final screen to ultimately refine and represent exactly what they're looking for. This mixing and matching is very normal and expected because it's very rare for a client to choose one screen and say, yep, that's perfect, we don't want to change anything else. The real value of showing multiple options is that it helps the client understand their own preferences and it gives them a vocabulary to express exactly what they want. want. Keep in mind again that this is all with no UX involved. This is only mockup screens to find the UI direction. We're not worried about user flows or feature placements or information architecture or any of that yet. So once the UI is finalized and the client is happy with the look and feel, then we move on to the UX. Having the visual direction locked in first actually helps me when I'm doing the UX portion because I know I'm not trying to do two things at once. Alright, so now we switch gears completely and move into UX mode. The mindset here is completely different. We are no longer thinking about how things actually look. Now we are thinking about how things work and how the users will interact with the actual product. So I start with a brain dump of all the features that the client is thinking of. Every single thing that they want the product to do. Every dream idea that they've had, including every feature that they've seen in competitor apps that they might want to include in their own. The goal is to get it all out on the table without judging or filtering. We want to capture the complete vision even if we can't build it right away and we know that things might change in the future. This brain dump usually results in a super long list, but that's completely okay. I feel like it's important to let the client express their full vision before you start narrowing things down. After that step, that's when we start refining for the MVP. MVP stands for minimal viable product, which means only the core features that need to be there for the product to launch. Usually this ends up being around 3 to 5 main screens and features, which is the stuff that actually genuinely has to be there in order for the product to work. This refinement process is really important and it requires a very honest conversation. Clients often come with huge lists and big visions, which is really exciting and it shows that they're very passionate about their product, but you can't design everything all at once, especially if you want to do it well. You need to focus on what matters most, ship that, learn from real users, and then refine from there. I really try to help clients understand that cutting features from the MVP does not mean that those will not exist in the future. It just means that we're being strategic about what to build first. This approach actually leads to better products in the long run because you're building based on real feedback rather than just assumptions. So now, once we figure out the MVP features, I figure out the screen flow. This is essentially a map of how a user will move throughout the app. Things like what screen do they see first and where do they go from there. I usually sketch this out as a simple diagram showing screens as labeled boxes and arrows indicating how a user would navigate between them. This really helps to visualize the structure of the app and identify any gaps or any confusing paths. For example, if a user needs to complete a purchase, what's the flow? They see a product, they add it to the cart, they go to the cart, they enter payment info, confirm, see a confirmation, and then that's the end of the flow. Each of those steps is a screen and the arrows indicate the path. From there, we can see if we're missing any steps or if any of the steps are unnecessary. So from there, I start creating the wireframes one screen at a time. So wireframes are low fidelity layouts that show the structure and the placement of elements on the screen without getting into any of the visual details. They're usually black or white or grayscale with simple boxes and rectangles that indicate buttons, text areas, and images. The point of the wireframes is to focus on the layout without getting distracted by the colors or the fonts. We're solving only the structural problems. For UX research, I use Mobbin constantly. It's amazing for seeing industry standards on UX components and patterns, things like how do other apps handle search functionality, what do navigation patterns typically look like, and how do settings screens organize information. Mobbin also lets you filter by specific UI elements and screen types, so if I'm designing a checkout flow, I can look at how dozens of other apps approach their checkout experience. If I'm designing a profile screen, I can see a lot of examples of how other products handle that. This actually saves me so much time and helps you avoid reinventing the wheel on patterns that users already understand. There is real value in following conventions and common interactions because users have built up expectations from other apps. If your search bar is in a weird place or your navigation works differently than any other app, you might be creating unnecessary friction. Sometimes there are good reasons to break down conventions, but you should do so intentionally and for a clear purpose while also making sure not to confuse the user. So as I create the wireframes, I share them with the client for feedback. Things will obviously change as you work together since design is iterative by nature. The client might realize that the feature doesn't make sense, or they might have new ideas as they see the structure take shape. That again is completely normal and also part of the process. However, it's important to be flexible while also being strong in your contract so that you're not overworked with endless iterations. Have clear boundaries around how many revision rounds are included and what counts as a revision or a new feature request. Otherwise, projects can drag on forever with scope creeping beyond what was originally agreed. I typically structure contracts with a specific number of revision rounds for each phase. After those rounds are used, additional revisions are billed separately. This ultimately protects my time and also encourages your clients to give helpful, consolidated feedback rather than drip feeding small changes indefinitely. So once the UX wireframes are finalized and the client has approved the structure and the flow, the exciting part happens next. Now it's time to combine the UI and the UX. This is where the visual direction that we established earlier gets applied to the actual screens and the features that we designed. I take the look and feel from the UI mockups with the colors, typography, hierarchy, spacing, and visual personality, and then I apply them to the wireframes. Now suddenly the product starts to feel real. What was just a gray box labeled button is now a real button with the correct styling, colors, text, etc. After a few of the main screens, this is where I check in with the client just to make sure I'm in the right direction. Usually at this point, we're pretty aligned because we've been collaborating all along, and they've already approved the visual direction and the UX structure. Combining them should not produce any major surprises. There might be some small tweaks and adjustments as things come together. Sometimes a color that looked great on a mockup doesn't really work well when applied to a dense information screen, or maybe the spacing needs adjustment when everything is laid out in place, but the big decisions have already been made, so this phase is usually about refinement rather than big major changes. From there, it's simply just polishing and iterating, just making sure that everything is pixel perfect. Also, don't forget to consider and create the additional screens such as error states, empty states, loading states, and success states. So that's how I structure my product design projects. It's a lot of collaboration, a lot of iteration, and a lot of intentional separation between visual and structural concerns. Having this process in place makes each project smoother and helps me deliver better work. Now let's talk about branding, because a lot of projects involve branding work either on its own or as part of a larger product design engagement. And honestly, branding should often come first when you're building something new. This is because branding establishes the foundational visual elements like colors, typography, logo, and the overall personality of the brand. These elements then get applied to everywhere else, including the product UI and the landing page. If you try to design the landing page before the branding is finalized, you will most likely have to redo a lot of the work when the brand direction changes. So whenever possible, I try to nail down the branding first before moving on to any of the other deliverables. Branding assets include a lot of important elements. The color palette defines the primary and the secondary colors that will be used across all touch points, and these colors communicate personality and evoke specific emotions. The typography system includes fonts for headlines, body text, and special applications, plus sometimes guidelines for how and when to use them. The logo, of course, is the central mark that identifies the brand, and it often includes variations for different contexts, like a full logo or a simplified icon version, light and dark backgrounds, and so on. Beyond these core elements, branding might also include things like a slogan or a tagline that captures the brand essence. Also, illustration style or photography direction if that's included in the brand assets, if visual content is part of the brand, iconography standards if custom icons are included, and sometimes motion principles if animation is included in the process as well. So my process for developing branding is actually pretty similar to what I described for product design. It's a lot of collaboration, finding inspiration, figuring out a direction, and working with the client to refine and finalize things. For branding inspiration, I use a lot of the same resources that I mentioned earlier, or you can search for brand identity and logo design, and you'll find thousands of examples showing how other designers from other companies approach the process. A nice design hack that I found out while I was first getting back into designing was looking at full brand identity systems, where you can see how all the elements work together for a specific brand. These can all be found in the Figma community resources section, and it's super underrated, and there's a lot of different companies like Airbnb, Uber, Google, etc. Pinterest is a great place to start for mood boards for personality, just like when I find mood boards for the product design. You can collect images that capture the feeling that the brand should have, even if those images have absolutely nothing to do with the logos or the colors or the UI specifically. Fonts.google.com and other typography resources are important for exploring type options. Typography is such a huge part of brand personality. A rounded, friendly sans serif communicates something very different from a sharp, elegant serif or a geometric modern typeface. Spending time exploring fonts and understanding their personalities is worthwhile, and Canva is actually a surprisingly good resource for branding inspiration. They have so many templates for logos, social media graphics, brand kits, business cards, and a lot more. Even if you're not using Canva to do your actual design work, just browsing what is there can spark ideas and show you different approaches to common branding challenges. I really find it useful for seeing how different color combinations and font pairings work together. Branding process usually starts with understanding the client's user base, business, audience, and competitive landscape. Who are they? What do they do? Who are they trying to reach? And what do competitor brands look like? And how do they want to be perceived? Then again, I gather inspiration, create mood boards similar to the product design process. I might create different options and different mood boards that each represent a different direction and a brand personality. After aligning on a mood board direction, I move into creating actual brand concepts. This usually means several different logo directions that interpret the agreed upon mood in different ways. I present these to the client, and then we discuss what resonates and what doesn't. Again, they might love one direction completely, or they want to combine different elements from different variations. Once the logo is finalized, I develop the rest of the brand around it. This includes the color palette, the typography system, logo variations, and additional elements like patterns, icons, or illustration styles. Once the branding is finalized, now you'll have something to look at, and you have all the assets ready to apply consistently across the product, the landing page, social media, marketing elements, and ultimately everything else. It creates cohesion and helps the brand feel established and professional from day one. Last but not least, let's talk about the landing page design, because this is often a key deliverable alongside or following branding and product work. So a landing page serves a very specific purpose. It's usually the first impression that someone has of your product or company, and it needs to accomplish a clear goal. The process of designing a landing page is again similar to the product design process, but the strategic considerations are very different. The first thing that I need to consider when designing a landing page is to figure out the client's main goal. We need to know exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Is the goal to drive more app downloads? If so, the landing page needs to clearly communicate what the app does, show it in action, and make the download button prominent and easy to find. Is the goal to get more signups for a waitlist or a newsletter? Then we need to emphasize the value of signing up and the ease of filling out the form. Is the goal to educate the users on what to expect from the product? Then we need clear explanations, possibly walkthroughs or videos, and very clearly organized information. Is the goal to be transparent about pricing so that people can self-qualify? Then the pricing section needs to be clear, honest, and very easy to understand. All of these different goals dictate what needs to be on the landing page and which elements to emphasize. A landing page focused on getting downloads is going to look very different than a landing page focused on explaining a complex B2B product. I also try to think about any objections or questions that a visitor might have and how the page can address them. Why should I trust this company? What makes it different from alternatives? How much does it cost? What do other people think about it? Is it easy to use? And what happens if I don't like it? And I feel like the landing page should anticipate all of these questions and answer them. Let me give some examples to make this concrete. The Amy Food Journal landing page that we built in my past videos was focused on helping people understand what the app does and getting them to download it. So we emphasized the key features, showed the app interface in action through screenshots and videos, and made the download buttons prominent throughout the page. The goal was clear: understand the app, feel confident about it, and download it. A landing page for something in the food industry like a restaurant or a meal delivery service might focus more on removing friction and creating appetite appeal. You would want beautiful food photography, a clear and easy to scan menu, prominent ordering buttons, delivery information, and maybe reviews highlighting the food quality. The goal is to make someone hungry and make ordering feel easy. The goals shape everything about how a landing page is designed and what it should include. I think about the landing page in the same UI and UX lens that I use for product design. The concepts still apply, just in a different context. Figuring out the client's goal and figuring out what sections to include is all about the UX lens. What should the hero section communicate? Do we need a feature section, and if so, how should it be organized? Do we need a pricing section? The structure and ordering of sections matter because visitors typically scroll from top to bottom, and each section should build on the previous one. This sequence is ultimately a UX decision. Then finding the look and feel, the branding, the colors, the typography, imagery style, and the visual personality is all about the UI. This is exactly where you apply the brand identity to create a recognizable and distinct page that stands out from competitors. It should feel cohesive to the rest of the brand. Mobbin also has an amazing area specifically for landing page inspiration that I use all the time. You can browse real landing pages from actual companies, filter by industry or section type, and see how successful products are structuring their pages. This is so helpful because landing page design trends change over time, and you want to see what's working right now. You can look at how other companies handle their hero sections, how they present features, how they structure pricing tables, and how they design their footers. It saves a lot of time and it helps you understand current best practices. I actually like using Mobbin to study specific sections. If I'm struggling with how to present a feature section or how to design a testimonial section, I can look at many examples and see different approaches. I also like to look at Framer templates for extra inspiration. Framer is a design and website building tool, and their template library has some really creative and well-designed landing pages that includes a lot of cool animations. Even if I'm not using Framer to actually build the site, just browsing their templates gives me a lot of ideas for layouts, interactions, and visual approaches. Framer templates tend to be quite polished and modern, so they're really good for seeing current design trends, and because they're functional websites rather than static mockups, you can interact with them and see how animations and interactions actually feel. I usually go through several of these resources when starting a landing page project to make sure that I'm seeing a wider range of approaches before I actually start designing. Exposure to a lot of examples helps me understand what's possible and helps spark ideas on how to approach the project for what I'm designing for. So that's my process for starting any new design project and onboarding any new client. I hope walking through all of this was helpful, especially if you're doing freelance work or just getting started on projects. The main thing I realized is having a clear process makes everything smoother. This is for you and for the client. You are not reinventing how to work every single time. You have a structure that you can follow and adapt based on what each specific project needs. Clients can feel confident because you're organized and professional, and you can move faster because you know what step comes next and you know what to expect. The process I shared today is exactly what works for me, and it has evolved a lot in the almost 1 year that I've been doing this. I'm sure in another year it'll continue to evolve as I learn more, but for right now I wanted to share exactly what works for me. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or comments, or you want to know more specifics about anything that I covered today. I hope this was helpful, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.